Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Wibo Koole. I live in Amsterdam, and this afternoon I have the honor to introduce you to a project that I'm doing as a consultant or facilitator on behalf of the Presencing Institute. And first, I must apologize for my voice, because every now and then a cough comes through. I've had a flu and the cough is still not over. When you have a question, please feel free to ask it, and I will try to weave it into my story about this organization we are working is. The story I want to tell you is a story about a project we are doing now for almost a year and a half with Trager International. And Trager International is the umbrella organization that connects more than 12 different national associations of Trager practitioners. And of course, you will ask yourself, what is a Trager practitioner? What does he or she do? Trager practitioners are people that are very good in a kind of mindful movement or body massage practice, and they are able to connect body and mind, and by treating you, by letting you feel your body, they're able to connect you to let you reconnect to your own feeling of what a healthy body means, so you can live up to that. The approach, the Trager approach, was discovered and designed by Dr. Milton Trager somewhere in the mid-60s of the last century. He was living in San Francisco, and from then on, a worldwide group of practitioners, which now consists of about 1,500 people worldwide, are giving sessions to the public, and all kinds of mindful movement practices. And we'll come to that later. The key issue that the Trager community asked us to help with is the development of their organization. They were feeling that the number of members was stagnating. The current educational and administrational bodies and practices and systems felt like a burden that they really felt needed to change. And they asked us to help them find ways to change that and to create a new and flourishing future for this wonderful practice. So they asked us about 2 years ago to work with them, and then we started to get involved in the organization. First, of course, we made a kind of design with their executive committee on what we might do, and so the first thing we did was starting the stage of I'm not sure if you can see all this, but here at the top left of the U, there's the co-initiating and co-sensing stage of the U process. And in this co-sensing stage, we started off with about 20 interviews, deep dialogue interviews with members of their organization. And we deliberately selected members with the help of the executive committee that could help us seeing the whole system. So we were talking with people from national associations, we were talking with people from tutor practices, people that are instructors in the organization, people that have been active for a long time but had stepped out, people that were just students in the organization. And what we came across was that we felt there was, on the one hand, a lot of wonderful practices going on, people really working with their hand and being able to connect body and mind for the people they treated in an incredible way. And on the other hand, the organization felt really stuck. There was a kind of culture that people were angry at each other, people were not communicating very well, people had the feeling of despair, of things not moving forward, and it was really difficult for them to envision a better future. So that was really something they were struggling with. After the dialogue interviews, we said, let us come together with a group of about, with a group of all the areas, all the parts of the organization involved. So the students, the practitioners, the tutors, the instructors, the national bodies, and see if we can work out some solutions when we bring everybody in a room. And so the executive committee selected people from all over the world, from various parts, and then we gathered in September 2013 in Bettenburg in Germany, in a wonderful castle where we had a lot of space to work and room to go outside, also in a lovely countryside. At the start of the two-day meeting, which we found pretty short. 2 days is difficult as a starting process for such a big organization, but well, we said, okay, let's make a good start, and in the end it worked out well. But the first thing we did is introduce people a little bit to Theory U, and to the different levels of listening and conversation, to the elements of leadership in Theory U, and then we started envisioning. We started sensing together what really was at stake in the organization, which areas people felt really stuck. And so the first day was a kind of introductory day on where they were, what their problems were, the issues they were working with, and how they felt about it. However, that was quite introductory. Although we did some sculpting and try to make a picture, a real visible and material picture of the current situation. That evening, on the first day, we together watched a movie which is called As It Is in Heaven. And we let them watch that movie, and it turned out to be a wonderful, inspiring, but also sometimes discomforting and emotional event for them, because the movie reflected, in a sense, the way, in a sense, their own culture, and made visible things that probably had been not spoken about in quite a few years, or anger and other possibilities. So the movie itself is about a conductor who has a wonderful international career, but who got a heart attack and then goes back to his village where he was born, where nowadays nobody knows him anymore, because he went away a long time ago and as a little boy with his mother. But he gets into, he's been asked to revive the choir of the church, but eventually does that in such a way that he comes into a conflict with the parish priest, and then the two men really develop a very difficult situation. What happened there is that people finally, for the first time probably, they felt, oh, might also work with us like this, because the Trager community was founded by a Dr. Milton Trager in the 60s, and he built it to his ideas and his practice. And what always happens when organizations are being built up by one or two people in the beginning, a kind of culture is being installed, and this type was also a kind of, although a very friendly and warm culture on the one hand, it also had something of authority in it that doesn't fit the current reality in many ways anymore. So the founder was really focused on working with his hands and on creating mindful consciousness of the body, while in the years after that, and also after his death, people started building an international organization with a lot of formal procedures and other stuff around. But what really the movie did was sensitize people to the organizational cultural issues at stake. People went to bed in a rather, well, enjoyable but also sometimes sad mood, and the next morning we had planned a check-in. Not that long, 40 minutes for a group of 25 people, so everybody could have 1 minute or 1 minute and a half to answer the question. Well, what happened to you so far, and where is your heart and mind at this point in time? That check-in turned out to last several hours. And even to our amazement, it took that time, but we let it go. We did it with a talking stick, and everybody could speak as long and as much and as many times he or she wished, because we felt that this was the time that people needed the possibility to freely speak up about everything in the organization that was at their heart and mind and their emotions, and they did. And it was just wonderful to listen to all their stories. So there were no comments made, but everybody just listened for hours and hours to each other, to their stories, to their joys, to their pains, to their hopes, to their despairs. And that was really something that when we look back at that first conference with them, when we look back, we really saw a shift happening in the space where this group was. A shift in terms of, there is some possibility. There is, although we are angry and don't see a future anymore, there are possibilities that we could create. And there's also a kind of openness was developing, that people started to see the vulnerability of others. So people sitting on a governing body were not only the functions they represented, but they were real people that had their own problems and vulnerabilities and enthusiasms and hopes like others. So for the first time in quite a few years, they started to connect to each other. And what was so fascinating to us is that we only had to provide a space. So we didn't want to be the expert consultants from outside, steering them in a certain way. No, we really only provided a space where people could sit and could do whatever was necessary to create their own better future. What we did after that is the shift was visible in and feelable in openness between people, but also in the energy to come up with new ideas for the future of the Trager practice and organization. And after the lunch on the second day, we did a large brainstorm, or a large crystallizing of ideas, as we call it within Theory U. And then a lot of ideas came up. It was incredible, and it went on and on and on. And so we had, well, about 30 square meters of floors, all covered with post-its on possibilities. And then afterwards, well, we asked people, okay, which are the 4 or 5 most important things that you now have the energy to work on? And so they started to working on a prototype for creating a kind of Trager for daily life classes, where people can, like for yoga and other things, can be educated in mindful movement from the Trager practice. People started to work on creating better marketing designs for their organization on a new website. And also people started for the first time to talk a little bit about the structures in the organization that were confining them into some legal propositions that they didn't want to work more with anymore in the future, but were very difficult to discuss up till then. So the conference in Battenberg, which was the first conference we had with them, laid the foundations for a kind of reconnecting with each other within the Trager community, irrespective of positions people held, but on a very humane, human level. After that conference, 4 prototypes groups were formed, and they have been working since that conference for almost half a year, until we reconvened in Alicante in Spain, February a year ago. For that conference in Spain, we asked people to present their prototypes and to work from there again. We also asked the whole community of Trager International to become involved and send out to this renewal group proposals, ideas, criticisms, and other things. So in the preparation for this conference, we had to work through several hundreds of emails from people from Europe, from the US, from Japan, all over the world, with their ideas. Another thing that we also did, and that was one of the deeper learnings from the first conference, that we felt there was a kind of leadership issue in this organization. There were a lot of formal roles and representations, but never we heard that people were comfortable with those roles and with the structure. So we did some deep dialogue interviews to understand the leadership system and to understand the tensions and possibilities of the leadership. And what came out of there is that while the organization was built by one man and a small group of people, we discovered also that over the years, and also after the death of the founder, a whole democratic setup of national associations and an international body was formed, and that was something that was logical on the one hand, but didn't function very well in practice. And I'll show you in a moment why that is so. What we learned from those dialogue interviews is that people had the idea also that they were stuck to the formal roles, while in our idea and also in the leadership idea of Theory U, leadership is far more a question of paying attention to a situation, which everybody can do. So everybody in a broader sense is part of the leadership, and not only the people in formal positions. So that was another learning there that helped. So from the input, the dialogue interviews, the prototypes, and the wider community involvement, we designed a conference where we had at least a few goals. One of the goals was to create more prototypes on different areas, because there were so many possibilities there. Another was to feel a kind of reconnection to their own history, because people were had lost sight on where they came from. They had an idea of their history which was mainly focused on some bad and troublesome events in their history, while losing track of the underlying values and connections between people. So one of the things we did in Alicante in Spain, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's a very small part here. We made a history map, which is a kind of a timeline based on the several dimensions of the iceberg. So on the top line you have the events that are taking place. In the second line you have big policy changes, and on the lowest level you have the real values, the core values of the organization. So what happened, that people started to see that on the level of their values and their intentions and their connection to the work, they had always been the same. But that at several points in time, the shifts in the organization that caused a lot of struggling had been much more superficial, and did not defer them from their deeper values, although they had thought so. So that was one thing that they learned through this conference. Another thing that really made a big shift. When we were there, we really felt there were a lot of tensions in the group, and also in the international organization between different bodies. There were real struggles going on. So on one evening, I sat down with a few of the executive leadership members to have a dialogue on their actual and current leadership issues, in a kind of mediating way between them, and solving some concrete issues, which worked. But at the same time, my colleague Julie Arts, who I'm facilitating this whole press, she was in the big facilitation room with the other part of the group, about 20 people, and then they were working with this history map. And I must still compliment Julie for her insights there. She saw that it was a good idea to have a kind of social presencing theater exercise with the group. And what she invited them to was to feel and to move as if the movement and feelings they would have would represent a healthy Trager body, but would represent the Trager organization. So the question was, how would a healthy feeling Trager organization move? And that was something really wonderful happened there. Because for the first time in many years, people reconnected to their own work, to the body practice they are all so good at, and started seeing how a healthy organizational practice built on those values and built on their own inner knowledge of a healthy body, how that could work. And people, from that day on, people started really moving and talking and having dialogues and creating prototypes in a really different manner. What we saw happening is that people, instead of debating at the second level of conversation, as we have learned, started to empathize and to generate with each other. And ever since a year ago in Alicante, we have seen this, the ripple effect of this change in communication and in organizational culture spread in the larger parts of the organization. And I'm definitely sure that this shift started there with this question: how would a healthy organization, feeling from the core of your body, really look like and feel like, and people could imagine how that would work and what it meant for their communication. So I think that was a real shift in what was happening there. And from then, it also helped to re-energize the next day the prototyping, and they've been building. And on my small one here, you see a window with many open space possibilities. They've been working on I think 15 prototypes ever since. And some groups have stopped, but others have come up with wonderful ideas. So I already mentioned this group that has been working on Trager for daily life classes. There's been a group that works on the marketing, which has come up with wonderful new ideas. There's a group that isn't designing a lot of stuff, but brings in the changes in the outside world and asking questions about how the Trager practice could serve the needs of people in the world in these modern days with a lot of anxiety and big changes going on. So they're bringing in the outside world in their practice and connecting it to a wider society, societal issues. What we have seen, and I'm just summarizing a few of these of the results and the impact of the work they did and with which we supported them. I already said we saw a kind of developing a sense of openness and new energy within in this Trager renewal group, which slowly is spreading into other national associations and the other parts of the international work. Prototyping elements have started, and what also is important, we have seen a change in leadership in the organization. So formerly people saw leadership only as formal roles. What we have seen is that new people that on the beginning of the first meeting in Alicante, in Bettenburg, only were quiet, sitting on the side of the group and not intervening very much. They have stepped up. They are talking. They're taking leadership in groups and other places. So they feel more self-confident in stepping forward. what also has been happening is that new people and also new generations of people are stepping into leadership roles, and not only the formal but also the informal ones. And we have seen that the organizational culture is really shifting. People are shifting from the original, more or less downloading and debating on, and that is visible in a kind of blaming culture sometimes even, to a more open and listening culture that they work with each other. And if I look back into the tone of the emails over the last year, I can see and I can feel in the tone of emails that are written to each other that the shift has taken place. And sometimes, of course, we still have people from the Trager community asking us, when do we have the concrete results? Or nothing has changed yet. We need a complete overhaul of our structure. And interestingly enough, you see that people learn that prototyping in the sense of trying out new things before saying, okay, there is only one solution and that's the only possible option. But prototyping leads into trying out many things at the same time, so you learn much quicker. And that is something that is really has changed their culture, and it also fits much more with their core values. So where we are at now is in preparing the third conference later this month in Alicante again. We have some real challenges there. We have been talking with the leadership of Trager about taking again the ownership and the leadership of the process. So we will try as consultants to step out and to step aside and not becoming their long-term expert consultants. So we will design with them probably a kind of leadership group or consulting group internally of them that can do the work. And maybe with a little coaching of us, but not with so much help as before. We need to to find a way to connect the prototypes with the current structure of decision making, so that some prototypes become a kind of legitimate new ways of working. We are talking about the educational structure, which is one of the core elements in the organization, but people are already coming up with ideas how they could reform or renew that educational structure. So those are more or less the broad elements of our intervention. For me, this was really, and for my colleague Julie, really a wonderful experience in how you can facilitate organizational change with the U process, because people learned from this process, I think, a few things. First, that change and organizations is not only about structures or cognitive change or designing a new way from paper, but it's really about the change of behavior and emotions and the internal side of people. Secondly, I think they are understanding more and more the type of leadership that is needed here, leadership that is more facilitating instead of steering or directing. And thirdly, most of the work within Trager International is done on a voluntary basis. So processes are slow, but people can be, because there was going on so much disappointment and long histories of people working or not working together. But people are more accepting that processes go slow and that change and reform will take some time, but they can speed it up, not by doing everything in a formal democratic process, but by creating spaces for renewal. So yeah, this is more or less my broad outline of this this process, and I'm really open to your questions. Few people have already asked me some questions, and the first was Marcos, who asked that a major challenge in institutions is to break the culture of silos or lack of communication between the parties with only their own interests. And that exactly is what was happening also in the Trager organization, although it's not a big business. But what we could do to start changing that culture of silos or lack of communication or even bad communication is to bring the representatives, sorry for that, to bring representatives of all the different parts of the system in one room. And the example I gave of this check-in on the second day of our first conference a year and a half ago is one way there where you can see that at the moment when people are able to start really listening to each other, shifts can take. And I've seen many other instances also with Trager, but also in other places where I work as a management consultant, that if people, also managers, start to connect with others or with their colleagues on a personal and human level, silos quickly can fall down. Another question came from Susan on how did Julie organize the presencing theater metaphor of a healthy body. I'm not quite sure how to answer this question, Susan. What she did is let people step into several into the different organizational roles, and then ask them to go back to this feeling of the awareness of a healthy body, and feel what movement was being asked from them again. But if you have more questions on that, I'm happy to pass them to Julie directly. Holling MM, I don't know what your first name is exactly, but I see your Google name. How many sessions we did have? We did sessions. The whole process so far has taken almost 2 years. The first session was in September, but before that we did the co-sensing with dialogue interviews in the summer of 2013. Then from September 2013 to February 2014, people worked on prototypes, mostly via Skype in small groups, because it's a worldwide organization. And then it's now been almost a year that we before we reconvene later this month. And in between, we have been in contact with a small group of the executive and with the several prototyping groups that have been working on their own in the meantime. But as I said, Trager International is a voluntary organization, so processes tend to go slowly as people have mainly are focusing on a day-to-day basis on their practice as a Trager practitioner. Then the history map. I'll see if I can draw it on a quick sketch. Just a second. So what a history map just literally means is you have a timeline And then you have the iceberg model where on the top are events, and here's the policy area, and here's the level of bigger organizational shifts, and you have the lower level of values, and it's comparable. And what you do is on the basis of some big shift you can see at the event level, or people know there was a big shift there, you can design 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 periods and ask people to come up with either the events and all the and the underlying levels, and then work that out on post-its and then compare to what happens. And it's a very useful tool to let people connect to the history of their organization and see where it shifted. And it has 2 advantages. One is that people see, oh, the core values might not be at stake. Secondly, some painful or difficult moments in the history of the organization are often being voiced and can be handled and dealt with without blaming people or without blaming the past for something. So it's a way to settle with the difficulties in the past. And then the third thing is important, that from seeing the continuity and the superfluity of the superficiality of events should not cloud your ideas of the future. So I've been working with it quite a few times now, and it's a very useful part of our toolbox. Holling is asking huge benefits. Theory should suggest there are huge benefits to different stakeholders walking in the shoes of other stakeholders in their daily work early in the process. Did you play with that? Yes, we did. We did play with that, and sometimes we do it in the dialogue interviews, that we ask people, okay, and how would this feel from somebody else's perspective? So we try to have a dialogue on the empathic level of listening and conversing. And sometimes we actually work with our clients that they walk with somebody else a whole day from their role or their perspective, and see the world from their perspective. One day, I for instance, in a project in Boston during our CRU masterclass, I was playing a role as an Italian-speaking tourist coming to Boston and trying to find out, while my English was very bad, how to use the subway system in Boston. Well, I can tell you that was quite difficult, and it is a wonderful way of understanding how it works and where the difficulties are, so I could give back to the other people I worked with that day, how it felt for somebody who was not familiar with the system, how it felt to be completely disoriented. Let me see. Alejandro is asking, what would you say was the key to have the group agree on having an all-staff session? Were they already sold on the idea and trusted you, or if the client is not familiar with what you? We probably, I can best tell how we were approached. We were, in this case, we were approached by the Trager International organization because we work with Theory U. So they had some pre-knowledge about what it was, but mainly on the value level. So they appreciated the values that are incorporated within Theory U. They didn't have a lot of knowledge on the toolbox or the processes. So when we started working with them, they had some difficulty understanding and also had some questions about why do you do this and how do you do it. But the advantage was because they have a kind of body-mind consciousness approach, that they could easily step into these tools that we use in Theory U. To my experience, sometimes it's more difficult to work with it in a business environment. But as long as you can, as a consultant, create a safe holding space for whatever is going on, and do not jump on people's feet with a kind of wishy-washy talk. People sometimes, in terms of doing dialogue walks or doing journaling exercises or having moments of silence, in many ways is easily accepted. For instance, I work with a group of colleagues in Ethiopia, and to my amazement, people stepped into these tools quite easily. But as we learned later, in Ethiopian culture, reflection is quite a normal part. So sometimes you step into possibilities that you probably are not always aware of. And I have learned that one of the important things is, if you gently guide, as a facilitator, people into exercises that you really embody yourself, people really easy go with it, and then it's easy to gain the trust. Let's see if we have more questions here. This one is answered. Another one from Alejandro. How much would you give credit to the common understanding versus the trust in the consultants and the process of having people coming together? I don't think it was either the common understanding of Theory U or the trust in the consultants, but it was the trust people developed while reconnecting to the core values of their own practice as Trager practitioners, and the natural trust people can develop to each other when they have the opportunity really to listen to each other and just sit down and don't have to act immediately. So I think the core element is that people in a safe space start to open up and become vulnerable. And if the first few have said words that really touch others, more people are opening up then. Right. Any other questions? So maybe just a few moments of silence and see whatever comes up with you. And maybe you could share one or two things that you took from this session. You can put it in the question box on the Hangout, but I would love to hear a little bit back. Kathleen is asking if I'm having any suggestions on engaging senior management in such a process. I would say send them to the MOOC, but that's probably too easy an answer. Um, um, Sometimes it helps to start to start having just a friendly dialogue with senior management, but and sometimes one or two people in the senior management that are more open to these kind of approaches. Instead of only the rational ones, and so you could try to find out if there is any space or any possible small commitments to do so. So that would be, but I think it's very difficult to say in a very general way on how to engage people. What I have learned is that if I tell honestly about my own experiences with the U process, and not in an over enthusiast way in our Dutch culture, people are willing to understand it and listen to it. But if you have a question about this in a more concrete situation where you're working, I would be willing to answer that, and you could find my my profile on the Presencing website and ask me a question there. Susan is asking if social presencing theater usually is so effective, or was it just a brilliant idea to do it in this healthy body metaphor? I think it was my colleague Julie had a real good sense of intuition there. But I've seen social presencing theater work in many other situations with different questions. To my own surprise, very often people step into it and are also amazed about the outcome themselves. So I find it a really powerful tool. Yes. Agrida is asking if you were in a polarized country like Venezuela, which of course it is very much. How would you advise us to get to government to get to government people? That's very hard for me to sense and feel, because in the Netherlands I could go to almost every government official and just have a talk with him or her. But maybe there are some people, people that are friendly, and also there are people who might have connections to government people that are willing to sit down with you and have a talk. And other colleagues of me in the global practitioners group of the Presencing Institute have experiences with Latin American governments, so they might be more able to advise you on that, and I could connect you to them if you want to. All right. Well, thank you for all your thanks. That's really wonderful. I love to work with you all, and I hope you enjoyed this session. And thank you so much for viewing, and have a lot of success and enjoyment and fun with your work with Theory U. Goodbye.